I was just giving very specific marching orders by the powers that be. They said, quit screwing around up there and actually give them some information they can go home with. Wrap it up, put a bow on it, and make some sense out of it. So out of the first two talks, we're going to talk about a few things, and this is going to give you the how to, when to, why to, and how long you need to. When you're looking at your soil test, keep in mind, it is a set of precise numbers that are precisely ambiguous. The orange sheet that you have, and I'm saying this because I know how I perceive things. I've said before, and I'll say it again, and I never have to tell anybody this twice. I'm a little slow, but I'm consistent. This orange sheet has all the answers you need to improve your soil. It is the roadmap. It is the guide. And I had the best compliment last night. I was talking to a gentleman on my way to my room, and this young fellow says, I can't stay for the next day. He holds up his sheet, but he says, I get it. These are the answers I've been looking for. This is the roadmap. He says, thank you, and walks away. I just got my paycheck because he got it. What do I mean by that? When I first met our professor, Steve Weston, who I call Merlin, because he's kind of a wizard at solving problems for many years for us before he passed, I introduced myself at the first meeting because my mom wanted me to come see this guy. Oh, you got to go talk to him. He'll change your life. He's so smart. Oh, he knows this. You'll love this guy. He'll get you thinking about things you never thought about. It's like, yeah. Well, finally, I couldn't stand my mother beating on me verbally, so I went. Introduced myself, and I'm telling him a little bit about who I am. He says, yeah, your mom's already told me. He says, you're supposedly very well trained by the animal pharmaceuticals. He says, all I can say is quit being a scab like the rest of them and reacting to symptoms. If you really want to do something good, correct the cause. And he turns and walks away. It's probably the most polite insult I've ever had in my life. We start with the meeting, and we get 15, 20 minutes into the meeting, and I'm sitting in the middle, not making any faces, not dozing off, but I'm listening. And he politely comes over 20 minutes into the meeting, and he sets my check down in front of me. And he politely, quietly says, unless you have the ability to sit back, open your mind, and truly think, there's no reason for you to be here. And he turns and walks away. And I'm like, this dude is in my head. 5 years into it, he's telling me things that I've heard him tell me for 5 years. And all of a sudden, it's just like, you've told me this 17 times, I just got it. The reason I'm saying this is this sheet was because of Frank Oligary that Greg talked about. The information that you have on this sheet is what we use to get him completely successful and his input costs to zero. What do I mean by that? He used to buy about $500,000 worth of stuff from us a year, and when I told him my goal is to get you to buy nothing from us, he gives me the, okay. Took a few years. He's bought nothing from us for many years, and we lose a lot of customers to graduation. Our calcium isn't meant to be used the whole time. Our calcium is meant to structure the soil. What do I mean by that? If you have high magnesium in your soil, this goes back to the soil test. those soil clay colloids are stacking. It's an electrical problem because the clay colloid has a positive charge on the flat surface. It has a negative charge on the edge. A positive is not supposed to hook to a positive, is not supposed to hook to a positive. The physics of what we call available calcium stands every other clay colloid on top of each other and creates I-beams. This creates the 150 psi surface tension. This creates the environment for the microbes to live, to breathe, to party, to get the whole show going. Looking at your soil test, if you don't have at least 60% calcium on the base saturation of your soil, our calcium is not going to make that up. You've got to buy some. Talk to your coaches, talk to your guides. They're very well trained in this. You have to physically buy some calcium because that base saturation is the base structure. It's the environment that the microbes need to do their job. And if you're not over 60% calcium, the base saturation isn't complete. Nothing will work. If you don't have over 60% calcium in the base saturation of your soil, our calcium will open the door to an empty pantry. We have to have something for the microbes to go after and digest. The calcium that you will buy, calcium carbonate, is cheaper, but it has to be biologically broken down. All we do is start the process. If your pH is under 7, you need calcium. Get that number up over 7. The proper pH your soil should be is a 6.4, somewhere in the mid-6 range. If you're over 7, we've talked about this before, you have no hydrogen. Hydrogen is a major portion of the plant, 4% of the dry matter weight of the plant. And if you have no hydrogen on your base saturation, it's because your pH is over 7, and the pH is over 7 because you don't have enough carbon in the soil, you don't have enough oxygen, going back to the two big things, carbon and oxygen, to feed the microbes, and the microbes will lower your pH. Your microbes can't make ammoniacal or ammoniated nitrogen unless they have nitrogen and unless they have hydrogen. Ammoniated nitrogen is the reproductive nitrogen that helps fill the head, helps fill the seed. If you're not getting the yield that you want, if you're not seeing the test weight that you need, it very well could be that your pH is too high because of a lack of carbon, which gives you no hydrogen, and the plant can't make sugar because the microbes don't have raw ingredients. You have an assembly line, a manufacturing process that you're growing food on every one of your farms. You've got to have raw ingredients for the microbes to work and also for the plants to do what they do. I'm going to come in with a curveball here. Talking about hydrogen, talking about pH. If someone came in here with a briefcase full of money and opened it up, says there's 5,000 US dollars in here, and it's up for grabs. Any one of you smart jacks out there that can make heat right where you're sitting, right where you're at, just make heat, I'll give you the money. Being a little slow, I'd be the first one. I'll take that cash in my hot little hand. I get the cash. He says, okay, now for $50,000, while you're sitting right there, make cold. That's tough. What's my point? Stick with me here. I'm taking a curveball. In refrigeration, ammonia or freon is used to make cold. Where am I going with this? Ammonia and freon are weird little elements that if you apply cold to freon or ammonia, they warm up. If you apply warm and heat to freon or ammonia, they'll cool down. Is anybody picking up what I'm putting down here? The chemical formulation for ammonia is NH3. There's that hydrogen again that nobody ever talks about. The microbes will naturally make ammonia in your soil that in a cool, wet snow or spring rain, those cool temperatures will warm your soil up warmer and quicker than your neighbors. You can get in the field, you get a better germination. In the heat of the summer, when that sun is beating down and cooking everything, the microbes are like, we made some ammonia, and we will cool down that soil. I'll give you some numbers. We've seen as high as 12 to 15 degrees warmer soil temperatures when it's cool, and 12 to 15 degrees cooler temperatures when it's hot. So if some of your fields are doing really well until June or July and that sun is beating down cooking it, guess what you don't have? NH3, ammonia, because you don't have enough carbon or oxygen. There's that carbon and oxygen makes up 90% of the plant. There's kind of a cycle here. Telling you the orange sheet is your guide. If you haven't checked the bricks of your plant, please do. You don't have to check every day, just get a ballpark. You don't have to spend money unless you want to get serious and do some sap testing. Dr. Dexter did a fabulous job giving a lot of information about sugar. To me, I'm kind of a horseshoe and hand grenade guy. You get points for being close. He wants to know the decimal point. I want to just be in the ballpark. That's kind of what farming is. You got to get close and move on. As you correct your soil and begin the healing process, go to the bottom of your orange sheet. There's 4 things you got to focus on. Calcium and phosphorus, mom and dad. Carbon and oxygen, 90% of what the plant is made of. Why didn't I include hydrogen in that if it's so important? Because when you increase your carbon and oxygen, the hydrogen will naturally be stabilized by the carbon. It's that simple. So, every grower, every farmer here has a carbon and oxygen generating system on your farm. They may be on strike. They may be sleeping. They may be uppity. They may be being suffocated. You may have starved the poor little fellas. But if your microbes aren't eating, breeding, and partying, you're not going to make it financially in farming. Because they eat, breed, and give off CO2, carbon dioxide. And if they're not giving off carbon dioxide, I don't know where else you're going to find CO2 to grow a plant. They have to breathe every day. They have to eat every day. Please check your soil in the spring when it's wet. Please check your soil in the summer when it's hot and dry. Healthy soil should not get hard when it gets dry. It should just get dry. This actually works. So when you're checking your field, after your neighbor buys you a penetrometer so you can show them how to use it, check after a rain. Check when it's dry. As you change and correct the soil, getting your base saturation, calcium, up to at least over 60%. The magnesium, if you're over 12%, don't lose your mind. We can't abracadabra magic wand it away. But mom knows how to take care of a problem child that I call magnesium. It's the electricity. It's the physics part of it. Our calcium will come in there, and it'll grab salt, it'll grab sodium, and it'll do the same thing like what I talked about yesterday. It'll grab magnesium and say, let go of that nitrogen and quit causing trouble. And it will softly bond it so the electricity of magnesium is relaxed and the soil will relax. Every field is different. Every soil is different. As you increase the carbon and oxygen in your feed, in your soil, in your system, I need to ask a question. How many guys have livestock here again? Show of hands. Okay, last night we were doing a little animal pharmaceutical chit-chat, and all of a sudden I had all kinds of memories pop up. There's diseases in feedlot animals and sometimes in cow herds that if there's a vitamin B complex deficiency, their head will go up and kind of off to the side, and they'll walk like they're wacky. The vet will come out and say, oh, you've got actinobacillus pleuropneumonia, serotype 1, 3, or 5. Like, okay, the heck's that mean? It is a problem. If you're feeding GMO corn or corn silage, you may have more problems with this. Why? Because most GMOs don't have the capability of having the carbon and oxygen in their essence that a conventional seed does. Why is this important? If you have a dairy cow or a stock cow, milk is made in the blood. The red blood cells, the hemoglobin, in fact, there's even a song, there's power in the blood, if the blood's healthy. Red blood cells have a high content of two things. Can anybody guess what those two elements are? Carbon and oxygen, absolutely. If the carbon and oxygen isn't in the feed, it's not going to be in the red blood cells of the animal. If it's not in the red blood cells of the animal, you don't have much of an immune system. And the first thing that you'll probably see is when some animals get up, they may stretch and they may run a little bit, and all of a sudden you'll hear this upper respiratory, that's BRSV, bovine rhino syncytial virus. You'll know it because there's clear snot coming out of the nostrils. If you have clear snot coming out of an animal's nose, it's a virus. Works that way with humans too. If you got yellow, green, or colored snot, it's a bacteria. If you got a virus, the only way you can fight a virus off is to have immunity in the feed, provide nutrition and love and good management. Many times, if you don't have good enough feed, i.e. low carbon, low oxygen, that BRSV cough will turn to possibly IBR or BVD. You'll get a little white dot in their eye. And they'll say, oh boy, you've got IBR, infectious bovine rhinotracheitis. We better vaccinate for it. You got a vitamin A, D, E deficiency. And if it gets even worse, you may see a different form of actinable serous pleural pneumonia, not the form that their head goes up and off the side, but the first sign of a respiratory problem is you got a dead animal with blood coming out of its nose or mouth. If you choose to cut that animal open, you'll look at the lungs, and there'll be big, hard, nasty, red, bloody clods in their lungs. Deficiency of B complex that all started because of a deficiency of what two elements? Carbon and oxygen. This orange sheet is your guide. This isn't going to be a 2-day wham bam, thank you ma'am, see you later, good luck. That sheet is your guide that you can take with you. You have a support staff of fantastic people. If you listen to Ed Kelly talking about the radionics, you have the ability to do your own soil testing. That radionics isn't for everybody. You got to want to do it. But if you focus in and do it, the price of that machine is cheap because you can test anything and everything with that machine and you don't have to count on anybody else. Keeping the power within your own system. So looking at the soil, looking at the plant, everything that we've talked about is an evaluator to what you have done and what you may change in doing. What do I mean by that? Let's be honest, there's a lot of horrible problems going on in agriculture. If you don't believe that, you're not paying attention. There's new diseases every year showing up. There's new insects showing up. There's new problems showing up. There's guys saying, well, we have chemical resistant weeds. We have super weeds. You got super screwed up soil. The weed is just proving that it's super screwed up. What does a weed not like? Look at the 4 things on the bottom of your sheet. Weeds do not like calcium, phosphorus, carbon, and oxygen. What 4 things does disease not like? Calcium, phosphorus, carbon, and oxygen. What's my point? You need to buy some carbon. And the more forms of carbon that you can buy in liquid form to feed those microbes so they can take the liquid form and make a gas, CO2. You now have the manufacturing process started. And if you have a low carbon to nitrogen ratio, you're going to have to keep spoon feeding that sugar, that humic, that fulvic, all the different carbon sources of the molasses, the brown sugar, whatever it may be, in liquid form until you get enough microbes creating enough CO2 that they balance your pH. They allow the plant to make more sugar that you can check. And then they also have the electricity to create the environment that's the heartbeat of the soil. Please take a look at the sulfur or sulfates in your soil because the microbes have to have a battery. And the sulfur is a relative to sulfuric acid. We talked about yesterday. Sulfuric acid in a 12-volt battery stores the electricity that the generator or the alternator makes. You got to have at least 15 parts per million of sulfur or sulfate in your soil to hold the charge. And the charge, thanks to Dr. Dykstra, about 1/2 volt per microbe. The sulfur or sulfate will hold that charge that you can read with this meter. You can measure it, you can monitor it, and you can manage it. 0.3 to 0.5 in the beginning, 0.6 to 0.9 at reproduction. These are the numbers that you have to look at. if you choose to get started, and I know we've thrown an awful lot of crap at you in a day and a half or 2 days. And if I were in the audience for the first time, I would be the guy that had the orange sheet and say, so this is the guide. This is the roadmap. It may take me a week or a month to figure it out. If you don't meet us halfway with mental try, it's not going to work. About 5 years into my relationship with Steve West and Merlin, every time, and we'd talk every week on the phone, every time we would talk, I would ask him a question about what I was dealing with livestock or soil or whatever it was, and he'd never give me an answer. He'd say, well, that happened yesterday too. He says, if I were you, I'd think like this. And I said, you know what, throw me a stinking bone. You've been telling me this, I'd think like this for 5 years. He says, if I give you an answer, you have one answer. If I give you the ability to think, you can have many answers. Another polite insult. I think he politely called me a dumbass. I wasn't thinking. These sheets are your support. The more you look at it and think about it, please mentally get in the game. Don't ask somebody to say, well, just tell me what to do. That's not going to work worth a crap. You got to measure, you got to monitor, you got to manage. And as we go through this, you're going to be your own problem solver. You're going to be your own crop consultant. And you're not going to need us for anything other than a friendly cup of coffee every now and then. This isn't as difficult as what the scientists make. Now, if you never spent any time in college, congratulations. I'm still waiting for a rebate from South Dakota State University because I don't think they taught me squat. I doubt if I'll get that rebate. What's my point? In chemistry, there's 2 different kinds of chemistry. Regular chemistry and organic chemistry. Where am I going with this? Organic chemistry is the study of one thing. Anybody? Carbon. They have an entire science dedicated to carbon. It's the essence of life. You guys have been selling carbon every year you harvest your crop. And as soon as your crops get below 10 bricks of sugar, they're not able to give back what they're taking off. Many times I hear people say, why do we have to put out carbon now? First it's nitrogen, then it's phosphorus, then it's this, and then it's that. Now it's copper and iron and zinc and boron. And now you're saying carbon? Why? Because nobody told us what to look for. Nobody told us what a plant was made of. Nobody told us what we were selling every year. And now all of a sudden we've either got to fix it or find another recreational career. If this sounds crazy, I don't blame you. It took me a long, long time. And going back to Merlin, I would tell him, it's like, you know, you just told me something I just heard. You told me that for 7 years. He says, why do you keep spending time with me and why do you keep trying to teach the thick skull something? And he laughed and said, because you're just so full of try. You just never quit. He says, you're always coming back for more. I don't have the heart to tell you no. So, thanks, Merlin. What I'm telling you, please open your minds. Please sit back and think about things possibly in a way different than you've ever thought of before. There's a lot of thought and logic that goes into this orange sheet. The reason we put down what a plant is made of is because we spent some time and quite a bit of money with plant physiologists. And they told us what the plant was made of. And we read books back from the 1850s saying what a plant was made of. And if we didn't know what a plant was made of, how do we know how to make one? Mother Nature is slow and deliberate. She has the ability to heal herself if you give her the raw ingredients. Again, if a plant is looking for carbon or oxygen and can't find it, it will take nitrogen as a dirty, rotten, horrible substitute. If a plant is looking for calcium and can't find it, it will grab potassium as a dirty, rotten, horrible substitute. These elements, nitrogen and potassium, will grow a wonderful GMO crop. These elements, nitrogen and potassium, are loved by weeds. These elements, nitrogen and potassium, love to create disease. Anything making sense? Is this still the English-speaking group? I think they're starting to get full. I'm not going to just stand up here and yabble just because there's time. This is all about you guys. And no matter what your spouse or your neighbor has told you, right now it's all about you. If this information is of value, awesome. If it isn't, hey, the teacher will appear when the student is ready. Please hang on to the end of that information, because at some point in time, you will have to focus on this whether you want to or not. Question I ask a lot of growers: when's the right time to do the right thing? Right now? My dad would say all the time, even when they're not looking. So the choice is yours. So I'm going to stop talking. Any questions, comments, or concerns, or something that I may have missed or didn't explain very well, because you guys got dumped with a lot of information. While you guys are possibly thinking of a question, the products that have been up on the screen that people have talked about, we've seen work. We know they work. They wouldn't be part of their program if they didn't work. The liquid fish fertilizer, the fat that goes to the top, the oil that goes to the top and the fat that goes to the bottom is crucial for microbial happiness. Fish is a dirty, rotten pig to work with, but it works. The microbes love it. So whatever you do, make sure the microbes love it, and you can test to see that they love it, and you can test to see that everything's going where it needs to. But again, you got to start with hair. So if there aren't any other questions, I am out of here. Thank you for your time. I hope it was of value.